Hello, friends. This is 35 minutes of purgatory that we call the D1Baseball Podcast. As you can hear in my voice, I am not Michael Patrick Rooney, although I dream of one day becoming Michael Patrick Rooney. That's for darn sure. I am Joe Healy, pinch hitting for Mike Rooney, who is, let's say, on assignment, to use a journalism term. He is on assignment this week. So he is not with us, but I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Kendall Rogers, Aaron Fitt, joining me from a place where I currently live, Durham, North Carolina, and a place where I used to live in the northern suburbs of Houston, Texas. Kind of funny how life works out sometimes. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
We're doing well. I'm here from inside sources at Runes, considering he likes every team, whereas I hate every team. He likes every team. He's trying to find a way to have a 300-team tournament. So I heard that's where he's at right now.
Yeah, that does sound about right. I think that tracks, as they say.
A 300-team tournament would there is a little bit of precedent for this, because a 300-team tournament would last roughly about as long as the NBA playoffs seems to last, which by my last calculation is roughly 6 months. So yeah, I mean, sure, why not?
I still remember watching the final game of the NBA playoffs in the press box in Omaha one year.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It was like in the middle of the World Series too. It wasn't at like the beginning of it. It was like the middle of it.
Yeah, the NBA playoffs start basically at like the midpoint of our regular season and ends about the time we're in Omaha, which is crazy. I mean, they're
really insane.
Yeah.
Hockey they do like a day off between every game.
Yeah, and sometimes two. Like it's all for TV. We know that's the case. TV dollars rule the day. Well, let's jump in here. We talked before we went on air for the listeners that we'll keep this fairly tight. We'll also keep this somewhat light too, because we realize we're at a time of year where, if you're still listening to this, chances are your team is still relevant, your team is still in it. And we're mostly going to try to focus a little more on what this means, what the big picture is, because we know that's why you're here, why you want the recap podcast. So Aaron, you have a skeptical look on your face.
Yeah. Speaking of mocking TV and revenue and dollars, did I miss the ad read, or did we have that already? I apologize. I missed it.
I did goof up on that. Look at that. That is slick. I want to thank our friends at S2 Cognition for, first of all, sponsoring this and every D1 Baseball podcast. If you're watching the video, we have that slick S2 Cognition logo up there in the corner. So there's that. And we also want to thank our friends at Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. That was the assist from Aaron Fitt. That was,
By the way, I know where we can start. Speaking of Pitch Logic, our man Larry Sorensen, who runs point for Pitch Logic, he's got to be feeling pretty good about his deeks this week.
That is a good place for us to start, because I was going to say, and either of you can take this in any direction, last weekend we had Clemson losing a series to Wake Forest. We had Texas A&M dropping a series to Ole Miss. And whoever would like to jump in and start, is there of those you think has maybe exposed some cracks in the foundation for the team that lost the series, or are you kind of willing to hand wave away both of those series?
Yeah, let's start with the Deeks and the Tigers, because the way you phrased that question was interesting, Joe. Because
thank you.
I've never been 100% all in on Clemson. I do like their team. I think they've had a wonderful season. I think they're quite good, but I've never quite bought in all year long. I think if you check the tape, I've never quite bought in on them as like a leading national title contender. And I still don't. I think they're certainly a contender, an Omaha type team. But I mean, they went to Wake Forest and played, I think, a very good Wake Forest team that has been up and down. But I think Wake's ceiling is still higher because of their arms, because Chase Burns, the Burns factor. We saw what he could do, the difference that he can make. But that's been the case all year long for Wake. That's been really constant for them. But I mean, gosh, 16 strikeouts over 7 innings of 2-hit ball is pretty absurd. But then to get, again, a good Josh Hartle performance on Sunday, it's a big difference maker, for Wake. I mean, 6 innings, 9 strikeouts, 3 runs. Like, he's quietly, I know it's been up and down. He's not been smooth sailing the whole way, but it's like he's okay. He's getting the job done. I'm not really worried about Clemson. I just think they're still the same team that I already thought they were, which is a very good team, a team that can win a lot of ugly games, a team that has managed to get the very most out of its talent, a team that can kind of patch together on the mound. I mean, Aiden Knock has still had a great year as a true freshman. This is his first loss of the year on Sunday to Hartle. But ultimately, so I guess it kind of depends on your context. Like, I'm not worried about Clemson. I just think they are what I thought they was, which is one of the top teams in the ACC, not the clear-cut top team.
It would help me if I gave us a transition there. Kendall, I mean, you're obviously a little more clued on the A&M side of things. I've gotten a lot of on weekend waypoints and on the highway to Hoover. I've gotten a lot of concerned A&M fans who
for sure
are worried about the fact that what really looked like the place they were going to be vulnerable in the rotation has arrived, as now this is a real problem. To what extent do you think that's
the script is kind of flipped for them, right? Like, if you look over the weekend, Shane Sadeo threw really well for them in the series finale, frankly, in a spot where they really needed to win. Because I think if they get swept over the weekend and then lose a series to Arkansas, I think they have some work to do in Hoover to kind of maintain the top 8. So Sadeo threw really well for them. I think the biggest thing is twofold. I said, number one, I have no doubt their offense is pressing a little bit. I mean, when you look at the numbers they put up all year long, against LSU, they had 39 strikeouts as a team. And if you look over the weekend, I think Lavalette, Montgomery, and Grahovic hit like 120 or something. Like, that's not – like, those guys hitting at that level is not sustainable. Like, they're going to get back in a groove at some point. It's just a matter of when. So I think it's one, they're just kind of going through a little bit of a lull. I think two, I watched yesterday's game and I watched bits and pieces of the opening game, and like I came away trying to figure out how in the world Ole Miss has struggled so much. If their pitchers threw as well as they were throwing over the weekend, like yesterday, like Wes Mendez, like it was electric stuff, man. Like it was like 94, 96 with like a nasty slider. Like Mason Nichols threw really well on Saturday. Mallets was really good out of the bullpen. Liam Doyle was really good. And it's just like, man, if those guys were pitching like that all year long, like where would this team be if you're Ole Miss? And so I think two things for me from the weekend is, one, does A&M's offense get back on track? What's funny is like we're going to sit here and talk about how like A&M's offense is in a lull, and you know what they're going to do? They're going to beat Hagen Smith. That's what's going to happen. Like they're going to like find a way to beat Hagen Smith after they struggled the last 2 weeks against two of the worst pitching staffs in the SEC. But I think for Ole Miss, it's really interesting. I think if you're Ole Miss, you're feeling pretty good going into Baton Rouge, because I think LSU, lost a heartbreaker in the series finale against Alabama. I think we talked about it in the podcast last week. Like Ben Hess finally showed up for Alabama. So that was a heartbreaking loss for LSU. So going back home to Baton Rouge, Ole Miss rolls in there after shutting down A&M's lineup. They got to feel like they can shut down LSU's lineup if they can do that to A&M, even though it was at home. And so all of a sudden now you're setting the stage for an awesome series in Baton Rouge between those two teams. Because right now, if you look at the SEC, you've got, Vandy, you've got LSU, Ole Miss, and Florida at 10 or 11 wins. And all four of those teams are not making the tournament. It doesn't matter if Florida's above 500. All four of them are not making it.
And
we had this. Go ahead. Aaron.
Go ahead, Joe. Please.
Mark and I had this conversation on the episode of Highway to Hoover we recorded last night that I kind of posed it to him, and we disagreed a little bit on this. I'm with you, Kendall, in that if you line up 5 SEC clubs that have between 12 and 14 regular season SEC wins, and they won a game or maybe 2 in Hoover, but didn't make really deep runs, like that entire group is not going to make it in. Like that's just math, right? If you've got 8 or 10 teams that are legitimately in the conversation, half of them are not going to come from the same league. And that's not even like they're trying to limit the number of SEC teams take. It's more just like the committee's going to rank those teams, and they're just, the likelihood of them all making the cut is super, super slim. And it's why I think next weekend, that Ole Miss LSU series, at least in the SEC, is my most intriguing series. Like, yes, A&M and Arkansas has been highly anticipated, but there's real stakes with this LSU Ole Miss series, where one team is going to go into it, feeling pretty decent about being an at-large team if they don't just, exit quietly in Hoover, and the other's going to feel like, man, we really got to get some work done this week.
Well, and there's a doomsday scenario in play here for the SEC, which is LSU takes 2 out of 3. Then all of a sudden, LSU and Ole Miss both finish with 12 SEC wins. Florida loses 2 out of 3. Let's say they finish with 12 SEC wins. All 3 of those teams could then miss regionals, and then you got Vandy, who's not a sure thing. They're at Kentucky.
By the way, those are all the most realistic scenarios. If we had odds makers on this, right? LSU winning the series at home, Florida losing that series to Georgia, Vanderbilt losing that series to Kentucky. Like those are all the most likely outcomes.
You know who I'm least confident about right now is Florida. And it's mainly because of the overall record. Right now, if Florida loses 2 out of 3 to Georgia, they have to go 3-2 in Hoover to make the tournament and stay above 500. They'd have to go 3-2 in Hoover. That's going to be really hard to do.
And honestly, at this point, I mean, they're at large resume. Even if you take away the whole race for 500 thing, their at large resume doesn't look very good anyway. I mean, it's they're down to 29 in the RPI. They're 11-16 against Q1. They're 11-16 in the league. It's like, what are we even excited about? Like, they have Jack Caglione. That's nice, and they're famous.
And Scott Strickland of the committee.
yeah. But I mean, they got a lot of work to do.
Our friends over at ESPN probably rooting for Florida to get in, let's be honest, because not having Jack Caglione in the postseason is like a big oof from a college baseball perspective, not being able to put him on ESPN.
It would be like having Mike Trout waste 15 years on, let's say, the Angels. It's like,
it would be just like that. That's so crazy. Yeah. What if that happened? That'd be nuts. And then what if, hold on, pause. What if they had Mike Trout on the Angels for like a decade or more, just being one of the greatest hitters of all time, and then you add to him the first player in decades to be a two-way player, and he's like all-star level at both. How about that?
It's really incredible.
That would
be really incredible.
I will say this, since we're talking about the SEC, and Joe, you were in Columbia over the weekend, so I'll get your thoughts on this too. But I mean, I really like A&M's club. I really like Tennessee's club. Georgia, to me, looks like the most dangerous team in that league right now. Like, they're crazy good offensively. Like Colton Smith, we've talked about it offline, but like the emergence of Colton Smith, Leighton Finley is certainly a solid arm. I mean, they've got a lot of options.
Yeah, a month ago, I thought, okay, this Georgia team is going to be a 2 or 3 in a regional, and they're absolutely going to be a 2 or 3 you don't want to see if you're a host. Now, I think they're pitching well enough to be an Omaha team. Yep. It's not. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's like an elite staff or anything, but it's good enough. They found enough pieces, and it's not just, like Colton Smith has like elite strikeout numbers and like could be a real dude, and Leighton Finley was a big time recruit. It's also guys like Zach Harris, a Georgia Southern transfer who was like buried a month ago and now is like a real piece for them. And so it's not like they do a really good job, and this is something I hammer on like year after year. So many teams narrow their bullpen so aggressively, and I get it to some degree, but what you lose with that is the opportunity to maybe find some guys along the way, and that's what Georgia has done. And to Kendall's point, like, I think they have the best hitter in the country in Charlie Condon. And this isn't quite right, but like you could make an argument that Corey Collins is maybe the second most effective. I mean, he's on base percentage is almost 600. I mean, he's leading the country, at least it was over the weekend, in on base percentage. And if you make a mistake to him, like he's got raw power that's not that far off from where Condon is, frankly, in terms of just raw power. So yeah, they're super dangerous like that. And there are a lot of teams rooting for them to become a national seed to try to like, get it more likely they don't see them. Right. Because they're go ahead.
How about this Corey Collins thing? If I could just interject here, because
100%.
I mean, this guy was a big time recruit. Like I love this kid as a freshman way back in like 2014 or whatever it was, like when he first got to Georgia. 2014. It was like a long time ago. I'm just saying, like you guys been around, and he's a
COVID PhD student.
It feels like he's been around for a while, and like it's just kind of he's fine. He's fine for he's only been there 3 years. It feels like forever, but like he was fine for 3 years. He was never really a star, and then all of a sudden he's third in the country in OPS. Like it's not just we always knew he had raw power. And he is hitting home runs, but I mean the on base percentage thing that you talked about. I mean, he's got 48 walks and 27 strikeouts. Like,
and he's been hit by a pitch 20 some odd times. Like he's just
like that's not if you look at his career, like walk to strikeout numbers. They're nothing like that.
Him.
He's never had more walks than strikeouts before. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just like all of a sudden, it's just, how does the switch flip like that?
Yeah, stay tuned to SEC Extra. You might get some answers on that soon. That's what we call a tease in the industry. Yeah, there's a bigger story with him too, because let's face it, he was a huge recruit. He probably didn't expect to still be at Georgia in 2024. Yeah. Like, he probably thought, I'm 3 and out, not in a bad way, but just because that's what you hope for. And it's not just that the bat was never totally there. It's also that, like, well, there was hope that one day he would catch.
Yep.
And he's never really caught. And then it was like, well, okay, is he just a first baseman? And the answer might be yes on that, but like I have to imagine that weighed on him at some point of like, I was supposed to be this big recruit, this big star. I was supposed to catch, and I've not lived up to any of that. So to see him succeeding the way he is, and I mean, he's going to get drafted now. I mean, how could you not with that bat? He's going to have an opportunity to do, to make it to the next level based on what he's doing this year. So it's just a cool deal overall. I will transition us partially out of the SEC here by giving you a throwback to the episode a couple weeks ago of This or That. Here is well, you'll understand it. Okay, which of these two teams are you most surprised is hanging precariously on the bubble right now if we'd have told you before the season? Because I don't think it's as cut and dry as a lot of people might think about this when I give you the options. Vanderbilt or Texas Tech? Take that either way you'd like. I
mean, I guess I'm going to say Vanderbilt because I don't think Texas Tech is precariously on the bubble. I think they're just off.
Yeah, fair.
That's they're not even on the bubble. They're 12-17 in the league. They're 54 RPI. They're 3-13 Q1. Like, am I more surprised? I will rephrase it for you. Am I more surprised that Texas Tech's not even on the bubble and that Vanderbilt is hanging precariously on the bubble? Yes, I am. I did. They're Texas Tech for Pete's sake. Like, it's Tim Tadlock. He's still the coach, right? Like, I'm pretty sure.
2015 the last year they didn't make the tournament.
And they have talent too. Like Kendall, I don't get it, man. Like, do you have any insights to offer here on the Red Raiders?
Yeah, the biggest thing for them is, when I saw them earlier in the year, they pitched well, but they were not very good offensively. In the middle of the year, they were hitting, but they weren't pitching. It's just like one thing after another. Like if they're doing one thing well, then that day they're doing the other thing terribly. And so, anytime you look at the rotation, if you look at the rotation, I mean, no offense, but they had Ryan Free starting a Friday night game for them at Oklahoma State over the weekend. I mean, Free was a situational bullpen piece for them last year. So it kind of gives you an idea of like they're just trying to find some sort of formula that can get them some wins. The problem now is like they're going to have to probably win the Big 12 tournament to make the field. I mean, maybe you get to the final. Maybe if you get to the championship game, you squeak in. But, I mean, as you pointed out, like the resume is terrible right now. So I'll be interested to see if there's some soul searching done from Tim Tadlock in the offseason. Obviously, there's been a lot of barking over the last couple of years just about their lack of success on the mound. There's, part of that is, I mean, Lubbock is one of the worst places in America to pitch, but they also haven't pitched very well away from home. And it's not like these guys have had garbage pitching, in the Tadlock era. The one year they had Davis Martin and Stephen Gingrey is their 1 and 2 guys in the rotation. So there's at least some sort of history of having, decent arms on this pitching staff. So, yeah, Texas Tech not making the postseason is going to be pretty surprising. But, I mean, on the same token, I mean, Vanderbilt, I think we all had questions about their offense, right, coming into the season. But, like, had you told me that team with those arms and that pitching staff would be hanging on by a thread, I definitely would be really surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it's a preseason top 10 team, maybe top 5. It was way up there. And, we had some questions. We needed to see – we liked their mound talent. We needed to see some of those guys really do it, I mean, the Grayson Carters, the Bryce Cunninghams, like they had plenty to prove. Even Carter Holton coming off a bad year last year. Like there was the talent was undeniable. And we just kind of like in Brownie and in Corbs we trust that like this is the number 1 program in college baseball over the last 15 years. I mean they're number 1 in our top 100 programs ranking, the most recent one we did. We just kind of thought they'd figure it out, and the fact that hasn't really been how it's gone, that's a surprise too. So maybe it's a push, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, so I thought it was an interesting question just because, and it's a good call on Tech. I mean, frankly, I think I didn't totally realize how far the tank Tech had fallen, but you'd think with it, so it might be a little more surprising from Vanderbilt because we had them ranked as a maybe a top 10 team in the preseason.
Yeah.
So that's surprising from that standpoint, but it's also surprising from the Tech standpoint because it's not like this is a banner year in the Big 12, right? And so I would think that a really high floor program traditionally like Texas Tech would be able to thrive in that type of atmosphere where like, hey, you just know what you're going to get baseline with that team. So they're going to be a team that's going to be up and, challenging to finish in the top 3 or 4 of the Big 12. And it just hasn't taken that shape.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say about Texas Tech, Joe, is there also needs to be a little bit of kind of look in the mirror on the NIL front. Hudson White, had a big hit for Arkansas in their series finale against Mississippi State. Former Texas Tech catcher Mason Molina in Arkansas's week of rotation for a top 5 team. Former Texas Tech Friday night starter. So I'm not saying you're going to keep everybody from leaving. Like some kids are just going to aspire to go to the SEC. But when you look at who they've lost the last couple of years, you need to do some work from an NIL standpoint.
It's a good call. My last thing on Vanderbilt is how amazing is it how often you give teams a full season and they end up being exactly who we thought they were. Sometimes it's easy to get a little overheated, and I did it with like, hey, when Grayson Carter first went back to the bullpen, it was like, well, wait a minute, this is his role. Now he's figured it out. And it's like, his ERA 6.5, right? And he's still not really striking out as many people as you would think, given that he throws 100 miles an hour. And, Bryce Cunningham has some good starts, but also some not so good ones. And the offense is pretty light. And so, I thought the offense is better this year, and it might be, but it's marginally better if it's better, right? And now they're a little banged up. Jaden Davis with the orbital bone fracture, like there's just a lot of things happening there. So I wanted to touch on something in the ACC real quick, and I don't have any better way to put this except for Pitt beat Florida State. Weird, huh?
Yeah, which isn't apparently, because I'm pretty sure that. Gosh, it sure feels like Mike Bell does this every year.
I'll look it up. Talk amongst yourselves.
Please do, because I know that like Mike Martin's final year, I'm pretty sure that Mike Bell played spoiler down there. I think that might have even been in Tallahassee. I don't know what it is. Pitt just seems to have FSU's number during the Bell era, and again, we'll see if the numbers back that up, Joe. But like
Mike Bell knows a secret sauce, man.
Yeah, it's odd. Obviously, like we didn't put a whole ton of stock in this in our rankings this week. We kept Florida State 10th, I believe, right in the top 25.
Yeah.
You go on the road, you have a hiccup this time of year. Like it happens. A bunch of teams this week we saw have hiccups. I think we all still believe that Florida State is a leading contender here for the College World Series and to win it all. I love their talent. I like their upside. But Pitt has been kind of, it's like sneaky frisky. Like the record is not good. I feel like they've played a lot of better games, just haven't gone their way. I don't know if they're just a snake bit club or whatever it is. They're 8-19 in the league. But like, I don't know. I don't feel like they're like a easy out ever. I feel, especially going up there, it just feels like they have a history of biting people. They won a game against Clemson up there. They won a game against Virginia Tech up there. Like, they just, I don't know. Or maybe, no, actually those were on the road. I take that back. Both of those series were on the road. So anyway, I know what I'm talking about. Pitt is just they're just pesky and they can't ever quite break through and get to a regional. They just like, that has not happened for them, but it feels like the Gritzberg thing, like they always give you a little bit of a hard time.
Yeah.
Florida State, go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say quickly, I haven't gone fully back yet, but they played last year, and FSU won that series. Pitt won. Wait, hold on. Now I'm already in a blender. But 2021 was the year that I think you're probably thinking of because Pitt swept Florida State. And if you remember, that was kind of on the road to Pitt ending up because of the way they unveiled the field that year. Pitt was named as one of the 20 potential host sites for regionals.
That's right.
And then ended up missing regionals altogether.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So that was kind
they
of.
They haven't done that this year, have they?
No, they just did the 1 year.
Just during COVID. No, just during COVID.
Yeah, it was just a COVID thing. So they went from possibly hosting to being out of regionals altogether. But that sweep of Florida State early in the season was kind of what pushed them on the course to be that kind of team. So that's probably the one that's most prominent in your memory, Aaron.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah, they pitched at a crazy high level over the weekend. You look at the fact that Jamie Arnold for FSU had 17 strikeouts on Friday and lost. The other news for Florida State is they got Connor Whitaker back over the weekend out of the bullpen. So that's obviously a huge boost to those guys. They get ready for the postseason. They get Georgia Tech at home this weekend, who gave Duke a hard time from an offensive standpoint in Atlanta over the weekend.
Quickly cleaning it up. Florida State won the series last season, which actually is kind of an indictment of Pitt, considering how last season went for Florida State. That was the one year where that would not have been an upset if Pitt had won that series. Quickly on the ACC too, it feels a little bit like, Aaron, I'm looking at you on this one, that NC State has done a little bit of a snake in the grass deal here. They have the same conference record as Florida State, yet they're fairly far apart in the rankings. And this is not just the call coming in from inside the house criticizing our rankings, but do you perceive those teams to be closer maybe than the rankings have them right now? How do you kind of measure that up, Florida State and NC State?
Yeah, I mean, they played 2 games in Tallahassee and they split them, and I think that's about right. I mean, we say they're tied in the standings, right? They're both 15 and 11.
15-11. Yep.
So, I mean, I mean, I think they are. It just feels like because of the upside on the mound that Florida State has, that their overall ceiling is higher because you've got a Jamie Arnold and, Carson Dorsey has been pretty good in that role. And now if you get, Whitaker back and it feels like maybe there's a little more upside, and I think Florida State's actually probably more talented offensively too. I think they're actually on paper, they feel like the better club, but I just think that NC State is kind of gritty. Those old guys that they brought in, they're transfer guys, they're Penningtons and they're Amacs and they're Butterworths, these jokers they brought in have just, they're winners. I like that group of players, and Sam Highfield's a winner and he just competes. The stuff has never come back to what it once was, but he just battles you. And, you got some stuff in the bullpen now. I mean, even though it sounds like they're without Shane Van Dam, you got Duden at the back. I mean, there's ultimately I feel like NC State's probably still a little light talent wise, but I always liked their team and they just find ways, and they're right there in the mix now. They're right there in the mix to host a regional.
Aaron, can you let Joe know where you got the scoop on Shane Van Dam, please?
Yeah, I got that scoop. My man Eli, who's in 8th grade, who I was on a Zoom call with him.
Wow,
on Zoom call today, giving him some career advice. And Eli, and I mentioned Van Dam, and he broke the news to me that he's out for the year. I knew he was hurt. I didn't know he was out for the year. So hat tip to Eli.
God,
new intern.
Let's get that. Yeah, let's get that kid on the payroll.
Can we hire an 8th grade intern?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, sure. That seems totally on the up and up. Anything else ACC wise before I'm going to transition us, but I want to make sure you guys unloaded the clip here before we move on from the ACC.
I mean, real quick, North Carolina, talk about snake in the grass. I mean,
fair.
They're, they've been kind of maybe depressed in the rankings a little bit because they have those 4 series losses, but they've been so good aside from those 4 series. And also they didn't get swept in any of those 4. And you look up and they're 20-7 in the league, and they're 3 games ahead of Clemson, who leads the other division. And it's like, North Carolina could wind up being like a top 3 national seed. They swept Louisville this weekend. They let's not forget they've done this despite losing 2 Friday night starters. With Knapp, who was supposed to be the Friday night guy heading into the year, and then Folger Boaz. And I kind of just think that they're really good. And I know it's easy to look at they're only 6-7 against Q1, and they have those 4 series losses. And those have kind of been our reservations about them. But I think their position player group is elite. And I think that they've, with DeCaro, Jason DeCaro, the freshman, and Sprague, the really, I think, very good pitchability lefty with experience, gives you 2 guys that you can kind of count on to give you some innings in the rotation. I think they got a really good bullpen. They feel like the team that's just lying in the weeds that nobody's really talking about, that should be on our list of short contenders to win it all.
Interesting. Hey, Joe, two quick things in the ACC before we close out the ACC. Yep. Louisville was a team that we talked about coming into the week that really needed a big week. They had Vanderbilt, North Carolina on the road. They went 0-4 during that stretch. Their RPI is back down in the mid-60s. Cards have a lot of work to do to make the postseason. And then Virginia Tech, we've debated Virginia Tech quite a bit. We're still waiting for them to add some meat to the bone a little bit. They lose another series over the weekend at home to Miami. They dropped 17 spots in the RPI. Still have a 14-13 league record, which is respectable, but they now have some work to do from an RPI standpoint.
And the momentum factor is not working in their favor, Kendall, because that's 5 straight ACC series losses, I believe. Yep. Not great. It reminds me, I mean, they've done this before, and now all of a sudden you got to go to Charlottesville and you got to find a way to win that series. Because I think if they lose 6 straight conference series and the regular season, their RPI is down there. They'd be done. So they just as must win. I don't care that they've got 14 wins in the league right now. Like if you lose 2 out of 3 in Charlottesville and you finish 15-15, you should not get in with the way they've played the second half.
All right, for this next little bit, I want you guys to put your Nerdcast hats on a little bit. We're going to talk about some Big 12 stuff and some Pac-12 stuff to maybe get us close to wrapping this thing up. We'll talk Sun Belt too at the end, maybe a little bit of potpourri. But the Big 12 is interesting to me, and you guys have hammered this home on the Nerdcast week after week, rightfully so, because it's a weird deal. Let's take Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, and maybe even West Virginia and Texas out of it, because they're all kind of top 4 in the league. RPIs are top 45. But you've got this weird thing going on in the Big 12 where, Cincinnati and Kansas, I think, have pretty good resumes, right? Yeah. But the RPIs just trail, right? And then you've got this group of TCU, Kansas State, UCF, where their RPIs are in pretty great shape, but they're all under 500 in conference. Do you guys have a feel for, or maybe you could just phrase it as if you were the committee, like how do you handicap that? Because I'm not really sure. Yeah. Like I get a kind of a bad feeling for the Pac-12 or the Big 12 that the committee is maybe going to take some bids away from the Big 12 because it just doesn't know how to suss that out. So it could get fewer bids than not, because I just don't know how you have one group in and not the other.
Yeah, the team I'm a little concerned about is UCF. They got off to just a smoking hot start, but if you look at what they've done over the last month and a half or so, it's been mostly series losses in the league. They've got a couple of series wins, but it hasn't been great. Cincinnati's a team for me, guys, that when you look at their resume, like I'm starting to really like it. I mean, they're 16-11 in the league. They're a little, they're one game ahead of some of these other teams. Their RPIs and it's sitting at what? Just
53.
Yeah, 53, which is not great, but I mean, let's remember, like Cincinnati is going to be considered a northern team. They're going to get. I think they're going to get a little leeway there. And here's the other thing: when you look at Cincy, series wins over Kansas, they swept TCU. They have a series win at UCF. They have a series win at home against West Virginia. And by the way, they have Oklahoma at home this weekend. I'll say this about Cincy. I think if they win that series against Oklahoma this weekend, like they're in.
Yes.
Slam dunk.
Exactly. I think I said the same thing in our chat today, Kendall. Totally agree. If they win 2 out of 3 against OU, they're in. And they also have UConn coming up at home as a midweek game, which is interesting. But, so there's some RPI boosting opportunities. But I think RPI be damned if they win 2 out of 3 against OU. Given the quality of series wins that they'll have and the fact that they'll be 18-12 in the league, if they take 2 out of 3, they're in. And I'll be interested to see at the end of the day how the committee treats this league, because you have a lot of these teams that, this is the first year, remember, the only year, in fact, of this particular configuration with these 13 teams in the league. We're used to the Big 12 being a smaller league, but this year we've got 13 teams. You've got more conference games. And so, like, if you finish in the top half of the Big 12 with a good record, what does that mean? It's hard to really kind of put that into context because we've never had this configuration before.
Yeah. And unbalanced schedules.
But like, if you're West Virginia or Texas or Cincinnati, and all those teams have 16 or 17 wins in the league with RPIs in the 40s or 50s. I mean, like in some years, an RPI around 50 in the Big 12, it's not great. But like this year, if you've got a good league record in RPI around 50, like, how is that treated? We don't know. There's no real precedent because it's, again, a brand new league in this current configuration. But it feels like there's enough respect probably for this conference. And the fact that there are 10 teams that have RPIs in the top 65, I think that speaks well to the depth of the league. And I do feel like if you have a borderline RPI but a good league record, you'll probably get the benefit of the doubt. But we'll see.
Yeah, my feeling would be this. I think Kansas is the team that's kind of the odd team out right now. I think Kansas would have to win the Texas series this weekend to be feeling pretty decent about itself. I think assuming Texas wins that series at home, which they won 5 straight Big 12 series, I would pick Texas there. If they win that series, I think Kansas is out. So I think what ends up happening is I think between Kansas State, TCU, and UCF, I think 2 of those teams get in and somebody gets left out. Yep. My hunch would be UCF.
Right now, for sure, UCF is at the back of that line. I mean, given as you mentioned, Kendall, the warts on their resume, but they're at Baylor this weekend, and so if they win that series,
pesky though, man.
Yep, Baylor is.
They're
pesky.
Not great, but I mean, they've won some games this year.
They're like the Pitt of the Big 12.
Yeah, that's a great comp.
They're 9-18, Pitt's 8-19, whatever they are. They're both, it feels like, a little more pesky than the record suggests. But if UCF wins that series, takes 2 out of 3 to get to 14-12 what would that be, 14 and 15 if they take 2 out of 3? I mean, RPI like around 40-ish, it'd be an interesting case.
What I can guarantee about the way the Big 12 finishes is that there's going to be at least one head coach, perhaps multiple, in this league who are going to be really upset on Selection Monday because they're not going to like the answers they get about why they got left out. Because unless all of these Big 12 teams are getting in, spoiler alert, they're not. Yeah. Some team with a really good conference record with a relatively poor RPI is going to get left out, or a team with a really good RPI with a bad league record is getting left out. And so the one group's going to be like, well, look at our RPI. You always look at RPI. And they're going to go, well, but your conference record. And then the other ones are going to be like, do the games matter? Like we went, 17 and 13 in the Big 12 or whatever it'll end up being. And the answer, of course, is that it's an art, not a science. Like both things matter and you have to weigh them. And it's not a formula. It's not a magic number, if you will. And that answer tends to not get.
And to thicken the plot, Kansas State's associate AD, amazingly enough, after the Pete Hughes stuff of last year, their associate AD is now on the committee. He's one of the replacements for one of the guys that dropped off. I believe he replaced Clean Scales.
Well, that's probably good news because I don't think any of us want to hear Pete Hughes go on the warpath again if they get snubbed again after putting together this non-conference schedule.
I will say this about Pete. Like I think if you like asked him, like I think he would say like his team has not put themselves in like position to be a slam dunk postseason team. Like they've left a lot of opportunities.
I mean, they're 6-14 against Q1, which would be a serious black mark against a lot of teams. But like if they win this last series against last place BYU, then they finish probably, let's say, 15 and 15 in a league. Probably still have an RPI in the top 40-ish thereabouts. They'll get it, especially if they got a man on the inside.
Well, that just means the Big 12 tournament is going to mean a lot, and the Runes and Stitchhead will be there.
No, if they got him in the inside, the Big 12 tournament won't mean anything to him. Listen, I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just calling everybody out. I'm calling the system out. Like we've seen it over and over and over and over again. Please don't get offended if you're on the committee or if you're a coach who's got somebody on the we all know how it works, guys. We get it, okay? Like you got somebody on the committee. I know they're supposed to leave the room and like not have any impact. They have input. We've been doing this long enough, guys. We know how it works.
We're on to you. This goes straight to the top.
Can we stop with the BS though? Like
Aaron with hashtag breaking news.
I have these coaches text me all pissed off after selection day because I say, "Oh, well, they got a break because they got somebody on the committee." Well, no kidding, they did. Like that happens every damn year. I'm not calling anybody corrupt. I'm just saying this is how it works.
It's just the process.
It's just the process.
Yeah, Mark and I describe it as partly a political process, is what we say. There's that there. Other Pac-12 thing quickly. Not Arizona State, although they're interesting because they're playing well right now. Arizona wins a series.
4 straight Pac-12 series.
Yeah, Arizona wins a series against Utah. Is the Utah thing over?
Yeah, I
hope it's not, but
Utah, by the way, their AD is on the committee.
Well, there you go. They're getting in.
RPI can go as low as you want.
I will say this. I think Utah would be in as of today.
Do you?
They're tied with Oregon for third place.
71 RPI, Kendall? Like, that would be unprecedented.
I think they would be in. I think it reminds me of that year that Washington got in with like a 3 RPI.
Well, yeah.
Remember that year Washington, 71. I think, finished like runner-up or something? And I think they got in with like a 63 RPI.
But that's not 71, and runner-up isn't tied for third either. Like there's listen, I would like to see Utah get in. I think they're a regional caliber team, and they've had a good year. But like 71 RPI,
they need to win. They need to win the series at USC this weekend, and probably at least win a couple of games in the conference tournament to have a shot. That's what I think.
Having this.
I don't think
series
they're out by any means.
USC on the road is a perfect opponent for what they need, because USC's RPI is probably higher than what USC actually is. They're a top 100 RPI team. So you're going to go on the road 3 games against top 100 RPI. You win that series. It's not going to take your RPI magically down 25 spots, but I think it'll get you into a more viable place. So I actually kind of fall between you guys where I don't know if they'd be in today, but I do think there is a chance we could see a historic RPI outlier. I mean, there's always going to be the outlier. So I think that's in play.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kendall.
No, I was going to say the other thing worth mentioning on the Pac-12 is if Utah doesn't make it, it's a 3-bid league.
Jeez.
And I don't think they're only getting 3 bids. I don't care. I know Mark would argue with me all day about this. I don't care what people say. Like, conferences get bids. It's not just teams get bids, conferences don't get bids. Conferences do get bids. And I don't think the Pac-12, the number 6 conference, is only getting 3 bids. The only other contender right now would be Cal, who, by the way, is 68 in the RPI. They lost 1 game to San Jose over the weekend. That really hurt them. And by the way, they lost a home series to Utah.
Yep.
So
they do also have a sweep of Oregon State, which is pretty loud, and they have 3 games left at home against Washington. So if they win 2 out of 3 or even sweep that series, that maybe puts them in a pretty good spot.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I would agree that conferences get bids from the standpoint of what we talked about, the political process. I think that ends up coming into play, where I do think there are conversations had where it's like, let's reality check this. Like, are we really going to give another bid to this conference? That I think those types of conversations do happen, even if they're kind of unofficial. Right. Quickly in the Sun Belt, I'll let you defend your Troy Trojans, Aaron, but like suddenly they're in kind of a precarious position where they lose a series to Texas State, who's not very good this year relative to what they've been. They're now down to 48 in the RPI. I think we all like them as a team. I still like their resume pretty well, but it does feel kind of tenuous.
Yeah, they're fine. Yeah, they're fine, Joe. We're not worried about it, Joe.
Okay. All right.
Their RPI is about where it was last week. It's in the 40s.
Is it? Okay.
All right. In the 40s. Okay. They're in 3rd place now instead of 2nd. Okay. Like they're 17 and 10. But I mean, they have the series win against Louisiana. They're still 6-5 against Q1. I got to win this series against JMU at home this weekend. And I like their chances at home. And JMU's, a good club and with a top 50 RPI. So it's not a pushover, but that could be a resume booster for Troy too. I think it could help solidify them. So I think it's that simple. Take 2 out of 3 from JMU and they're in.
Yeah, we just talked about bids for conferences. Sunbelt sitting 1 spot ahead of the Pac-12 at the number 5 conference RPI. Right now, Louisiana, Southern Miss, who had a big weekend, by the way. We would have Troy in. This league would probably get a 4th, more than likely. So JMU, Coastal with big weekends ahead. JMU just mentioned playing Troy. Coastal, which won a series over the weekend. It wasn't the prettiest thing in the world. They did win a series over the weekend, and they have Marshall on the road. I think both those teams still have some work to do, though.
Yeah. As long as it doesn't totally tank their RPI, you have to like that Coastal's getting Marshall, because you think that would help in the wins department, but it's a matter of, does that also hurt their RPI too much just having played those series?
The fact that it's on the road hopefully offsets that for them.
Yeah, it is helpful.
They also have a midweek game against Clemson at home.
Also very helpful,
which could be helpful.
We're so from an RPI standpoint, though, that we're probably not worried about that, just given that Clemson's going to almost completely offset the negative from.
Just to give you an idea, like the step down from like Troy to those 2 teams: James Madison 4-7 against Q1, Coastal Carolina 2-9 against Q1.
Ugh, gosh,
but Coastal's got a man on the inside.
It's the theme of the podcast.
There you go. You can go
ahead
and
They might have the chairman of the committee.
You can go ahead and put him
William J. Lepetamain of college baseball.
You can go ahead and pencil him in for Greenville.
Yeah, there you go. All right, folks. Well, that feels like an episode. We feel good about that. How do we feel post game chat?
I feel great. Can we mention the fact that the Big Ten regular season race is pretty crazy?
Sure. Yeah, let's do that. My apologies to the Big Ten.
No, it's all good. Real quick, I'd have to pull it up because I just wrote about it earlier today. So they have Illinois leading the league 15-6. Nebraska, who would be in the postseason as of today, 1 game back. Then you have Purdue, Indiana, and Michigan 2 games back. So theoretically, it's pretty much down to Nebraska or Illinois. But if Illinois wins that regular season championship, I think they're in the field no matter what their RPI is. I think they're 58 right now. The question is, who will be that 3rd bid for the Big Ten? And right now, I'd have to go with Aaron's Indiana Hoosiers.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's interesting because here's the situation. Purdue's they host Illinois this weekend, and so they're 2 games back. Like they could throw a wrench into this thing if they win 2 out of 3 or even sweep that series. And then you've got Nebraska, which is 1 game out of first place at Michigan State. Like if they can sweep that series or take 2 out of 3. I mean, it's we could wind up with a situation where we've got a bunch of teams tied. It's very interesting, but Indiana, they didn't win the series at Nebraska, but they still did rise in the RPI. They're 56 now, just because they went on the road, did not get swept at Nebraska. They're 2 games back, tied with Purdue and Michigan. yeah, it's a fascinating finish here. It does feel like maybe there's a path for 3 bids here, not just 2. Ultimately, I still feel like 2 feels like probably the smart bet.
Yeah,
it just remains to be seen.
Well, yeah. Well, and Maryland's the other weird team. Maryland goes on the road and wins a series from Boston College over the weekend. They're 35 in the RPI. The problem is they're 7th in the Big Ten at 10 and 11. So but they do have Penn State at home this weekend. If they can sweep that series, maybe they're the 3rd team.
It's a must sweep, but even if they do sweep, I think the best they can do is tied for 5th in the league.
Yeah,
and so you wonder if even
they would have work to do in Omaha.
Yeah,
they are going to be they are going to be a good test case for how much the conference stuff ends up mattering, because this is the number 4 RPI conference, and that's a good reminder that not all top RPI conferences are created equal, because this one is less because the Big Ten has a bunch of teams ranked near the top in the RPI, and more so because it doesn't really have the anchors it normally has. Like normally there's at least 1 or 2 teams in the Big Ten that are pushing 225, 230, something like that. They don't have that this year. And so that's why the RPI is where it is. So does the committee reach for that 3rd team that might not have an RPI that it normally would take, or does it reach for a Maryland because of the RPI, even if it's 5th in the conference or what have you? Like, I think I would almost bet on that. Like if you made me go 2 or 3, I think I'd go 3, because I do think there's going to be a level of respect given to the league, and that might mean they have to reach for something.
It's gotten better. Joe, can I give you one more little note as we close this thing out?
Let's do it.
I typically am known for hating everybody, but there's one team I really, really like this week, and it's Maryland Eastern Shore, guys. There's 0-45.
All right. Okay.
They play Maryland, Baltimore County on the road on Tuesday. And unfortunately, they have to go play a really solid Sacred Heart team this weekend. So Maryland Eastern
running
Shore,
out of time.
0-45. They got 4 games left. Can they win a game? I'm going to say no.
I'm going to be optimistic. They're going to get a win. They're going to get a win.
So just looking back, Baltimore County run ruled them the last time they played.
Okay, great. So the track record's not great.
UMass almost beat Lemoyne a couple weeks ago. They only lost 10-9. So they got that going for them, which is nice.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm rooting for them. I hope you guys kill it.
Yeah, go get it. Go get it.
Hawks. The Hawks, the Seahawks.
Yeah. Yeah, that's jokes aside, like, man, that's tough to go to the ballpark 44 times and lose.
That really kind of shows that you love the game of baseball if you show up ready to roll every time out.
Gosh, no kidding. Yeah, that's tough. So we're rooting for him.
No, absolutely, not even kidding.
See him get a win. Like to see him get a
win.
All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the D1 Baseball Podcast. Don't worry, folks. Mike Rooney will be back quickly enough to guide this ship, so that I won't be commandeering every week. But I appreciate you joining us for this episode and hanging in with us. Want to thank our sponsors, S2 Cognition and Pitch Logic, for sponsoring this and every episode of the D1 Baseball Podcast. Want to thank Kendall and Aaron for joining me, and want to thank you, the listeners, for listening.